Jeannette Rankin. Jeannette Rankin was born June 11, 1880 in Missoula, Montana, and died May 18, 1973 at age 92. Jeannette Rankin was the first woman in the United States Congress. As a Republican, she was elected statewide in Montana in 1916 and again in 1940. She was a lifelong pacifist, and she was one of the 50 members of Congress who voted against the entry of the United States into World War I in 1917, and the only member of Congress who voted against declaring war after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. She is the only woman to be elected in Congress from Montana to this day. Jeannette Rankin was born on a ranch near Missoula, Montana, to a rancher and a school teacher. She spent her first years on the ranch, then moved with her family to Missoula, where she attended public school. She later attended Montana State University and graduated in 1902 with a Bachelor's of Science degree in biology. She was a school teacher like her mother. She attended the New York School in 1908 and 1909. She then moved to Spokane, Washington, where she studied social legislation at the University of Washington, where she became involved in the women's suffrage movement. In 1910, while visiting Montana, she became the first woman to speak before the Montana legislature, where she surprised the spectators and legislators alike with her speaking ability. She organized and spoke for the Equal Rights Franchise Society. She declared that the vote denied women were being taxed without representation. Jeannette was hired as an organizer by the New York Women's Suffrage Party and the National American Women's Suffrage Association, also known as the NAWSA. As a field secretary for the NAWSA, Jeannette directed the suffrage victory in North Dakota in 1913. She quit the NAWSA in 1914 and returned to Montana to help secure passage for women's suffrage there, which was achieved later in 1914. Her work in the first women's rights movement is closely linked to her pacifism and dedication to peaceful foreign policies that would later define her congressional contribution. She believed, as many women's suffrage advocates did during this period, that the corruption and dysfunction of the United States government was a result of lack of feminine participation. As she states very clearly at a conference during the interwar years, the peace problem is a woman's problem. As the war in Europe loomed, Jeannette turned her attention to work for peace, and in 1916 ran for one of the 2 seats in Congress for Montana as a Republican. Her brother served as her campaign manager and helped finance her campaign. Jeannette Rankin won. She became the first woman elected in the U.S. Congress and the first woman elected in the national legislature in any Western democracy. Jeannette used a famous first position to work for peace and women's rights and against child labor. Only 4 days after taking office, Jeannette made history in yet another way. She voted against the U.S. entry into World War I. She violated protocol by speaking during roll call before casting her vote, announcing, "I want to stand by my country, but I cannot vote for war." In 1917, she opened the congressional debate on the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, which passed the House in 1917 and the Senate in 1918 and later became the 19th Amendment. Jeannette's first anti-war vote sealed her political fate. When she was gerrymandered out of the district, she ran for Senate, lost the primary, launched a third-party race, and lost overwhelmingly. After the war ended, Jeannette continued to work for peace through the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and also began work for the National Consumers League. She also worked on the staff of the American Civil Liberties Union. After moving to a farm in Georgia from her home, she became field secretary of the WILPF and lobbied for peace. When she left the WILPF, she formed a Georgia Peace Society. She lobbied for Women's Peace Union, working for an anti-war constitutional amendment. She left the Peace Union and began working for the National Council for the Prevention of War. She also lobbied the American Corporation with the World Court and for labor reforms and the end of child labor. In the first half of 1937, she spoke in 10 states, gave 93 speeches for peace. She supported the American First Commitment, but decided that lobbying was not the most effective way to work for peace. In 1939, she had returned to Montana and was running for Congress again, supporting a strong but neutral America in yet another time of impending war. Jeannette arrived in Washington in January as one of the 6 women in the House and 2 in the Senate, when after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Congress voted to declare war against Japan. Jeannette once again voted no to war. She also once again violated long tradition and spoke before her roll call, at this time saying, "A woman cannot go to war, and I refuse to send anyone else to war." She believed that Roosevelt had deliberately provoked the attack on Pearl Harbor. In 1943, Jeannette went back to Montana rather than run for Congress again. In 1963, she led more than 5,000 women in a protest to Washington, D.C., demanding the U.S. withdraw from Vietnam, heading up the group called Jeannette Rankin Brigade. She was active in an anti-war movement, often invited to speak or honored by the young anti-war activists and feminists. Jeannette remained active in politics up until her death. Jeannette Rankin's career has left behind a legacy of controversy, some viewing her as an impossible idealist, and others identifying her as an inspirational to be pursued. Her contributions to various feminist movements cannot be ignored and continue to be used today. Jeannette Rankin believed that she could make a change in women's rights, peace, child welfare, and civil rights. Not only did she believe she could make a difference, but she took the actions and made a difference. Thank you.